Hi, Eddie. Hello, Peter Mio. Hello, Lola Ray. Good to see some familiar faces or some familiar usernames and some new ones. That sounds nice. Thank you. Yeah, that's a nice song. Pretty easy, too, actually. You got banned again? It's just another Tuesday at this point. Honestly, it didn't even surprise me this time. It's interesting thinking back to like the first time we got banned. And like how mad I was compared to now, I don't really care. Um, but yeah, just another Tuesday. I forgot what day of the week it was for a second there. Um, I have all these sound effects now on my stream deck, but I guess I forgot to do a booing sound effect. I wanted to say I got banned and then go boo, but I'll just do this. It's me laughing when I get banned by the NATO operatives that run TikTok. And just as I said that, Jacob says, "Hello, Comrade Eddie. I'm sorry that NATO suppressed you on TikTok again." Thanks, Jacob. It's okay. You don't have to be sorry for me. I'm just sorry that we can't make TikTok content anymore. I'm honestly kind of excited to take a break from the app. I'm obviously not a huge fan of that app, so yeah. But for those who don't know, this is what Jacob is discussing. He's not just joking when he says that NATO suppressed us on TikTok. Oops, I forgot to share my screen. That's not just hyperbole or a funny joke like, haha, the CIA spying on us or NATO suppressing us. No, NATO literally has former operatives working at TikTok. Oracle, the company that manages TikTok's data in the US, it's a Texas-based company. TikTok is based in China, but the US version of the company was sold to Oracle or given to Oracle because the US government was threatening to ban it otherwise. So right after that happened, not coincidentally, was the first time our account got banned, the one that had almost 400,000 followers. And then Mint Press, a little bit later, Alan McLeod of Mint Press News released this article and found that they had been employing a bunch of former national security agents and NATO operatives. And Twitter is doing the same thing. There's even some overlap between the Twitter and NATO employees, I believe. I haven't read that full article in a while, but yeah, so that's what's happening on TikTok. Super cool. Super cool. I mean, I know the higher ups don't care. I know the people managing the content who choose to ban our account don't care. They didn't even give us an appeal option, by the way. They didn't even give us the option to appeal it, which last time we appealed it and they put it back up. But like they're doing incalculable damage to children because children mostly use that app. And they're creating an echo chamber. They're creating a neoliberal, imperialist, pro-NATO echo chamber. And it's not that it's not that people like us are just getting piled on or getting ratioed or that they're proving our arguments wrong. In fact, that never happens. It's just that they just ban us completely. They just take our content down completely and allow Philip DeFranco to put out blatant misinformation over and over and over again. The other day I made a video about Phil DeFranco's Nord Stream pipeline video where he said Russia did it, and anybody accusing the U.S. of doing it is a Russian bot or a Putin puppet. That's blatant misinformation. That's a blatant lie. We know that the U.S. did it. It was obvious that the U.S. did it from the start, but now we have Seymour Hersh's article, which is anonymously sourced, but still it goes into great detail of how the operation was launched, the debate within Washington, who wanted to blow up Nord Stream versus who didn't, and the debate about how to actually get it done. We know all of this now, but Phil's video spreading blatant misinformation and accusing people like us of being bots is still up. And our video explaining the truth, which kind of blew up despite our whole account being shadow banned, that's permanently taken down now. So the kids that are using this app are, having their brains trained. And then we wonder why people are so scared of socialism, why people are so propagandized about socialism. We wonder why the State Department is so easily able to manufacture consent whenever they want to do another intervention. We wonder how people all have these, comical ideas of what China and the DPRK and Cuba are actually like, without ever having studied the country in any kind of depth at all. It's because of this. It's because anyone saying the truth, anyone saying an alternative narrative, even if they're sticking strictly to facts, are going to be banned, are going to be suppressed. And then you're going to have these algorithmically boosted accounts like Philip DeFranco doing literal straight up NATO propaganda that gets hundreds of thousands of views, and they'll just ban all his critics. It's so sad. Now I'm actually kind of upset about it again. Personally, I don't care because I do care because we lose that platform. I don't care about not having to make TikToks. I'm going to take a break from the app for a while. But it's just crazy that the platform has become such a terrible echo chamber. And they took away my martial arts account again. They took away my martial arts account, which is how they're basically just banning my face, and how we're getting attacked by people like Seabash and Dinesh, the people who doxed me, who I had recently just made a video about actually exposing what happened. So go figure that we get banned as soon as we expose people who doxed us, who are still allowed to keep their freaking accounts because TikTok is hell. So yeah, I'm sure they targeted us and had something to do with it, but that's it's not only is TikTok brainwashing kids, but it's literally an unsafe platform now. Like you have these scammers and doxers who have millions of followers on the app, and all of their critics get permabanned while they're allowed to keep these accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers that they used to scam people out of money and release people's actual location. So I'll have to have Seabass on the TikTok on the Twitch to debate him. Hey everybody. Hey Where Pilgrim, how are you? Shout out to everybody's favorite moderator, Where Pilgrim. How are you? Hey Eddie. GD again? Yep, again. They got us again. Crack Mama James. Eddie, are you live on YouTube and Twitch at the same time? I am indeed. That's what we do via StreamYard. We're also live on Facebook if people prefer Facebook. I don't know if that's the best way to go, but that's what we're going to do because I want to have the widest outreach. And I previously preferred people using Twitch because you can subscribe to us and get custom Twitch emotes. But now we have those for YouTube too, actually, with the memberships, which, by the way, we have memberships now on YouTube if that's how you want to support the project. So got Patreon, TikTok subs, YouTube memberships, and I think that's it. But still not on TikTok. What am I missing? We just got our 7th account just got banned, and actually our 8th total account because they banned the martial arts account that I had, where I definitely 100% did not post anything against community guidelines. There's no argument they could make. That's literally an account that I just run with my roommate. But I'm sure Dinesh and Seabass and these other scammers who doxed me on TikTok, for those who don't know, with hundreds of thousands of followers, targeted my martial arts account because they know it means something to me. They know that I actually, care about it and like talking about MMA with people and growing that account. But tried to type a comment on TikTok several days ago and it was removed whenever it was liked. Then it was disliked. That's weird. Yeah, it's a weird app. I imagine most people in this chat are on some sort of shit list, probably. I'm pretty sure that bastard Seabass is having a field day with this if he hasn't already creamed his pants. Yeah, I gotta have that guy on. I gotta have him on the Twitch so I can debate him into having another mental breakdown. How large did the most recent account get before it was banned? It was 22.6 thousand followers, I think. It blew up right away. And then it looked like we got shadow banned, like the videos weren't getting as many views and weren't blowing up the same way they always do at first. But yeah, we were still going up in followers. We had gone up like 800 followers overnight the night before it got banned. So They are endangering people in marginalized communities. Several of us and our kids have been terrorized by Dinesh and his fascistic clan. Yeah, I'm sure. They're terrible. They're literally a group of scammers and doxxers who just attack people who don't like this Dinesh guy. Probably has to do with Ohio Chernobyl stuff getting more attention with the national media. Can't have commies making a point of how capitalism is directly responsible for that stuff. Yeah, can't have that. Hey, Eddie, as the falling rate of profit, resource scarcity from endless growth and extraction continues, do you see neoliberal capitalism devolving into barbarism/fascism in the imperial core? I mean, I think we all, like, our system now is already pretty close to fascism, honestly. If you look at who's running the system, and if you look at the fact that, like George Bush's grandpa, Prescott Bush, made a lot of his money allying with the Nazis and donated a ton of money to the Nazis in Hitler's Germany. And, now not only his son, but his grandson then became, his descendants, two of his descendants is what I'm trying to say. I can't think of the exact Bush family tree right now, but two of his descendants were president of the United States. And, they both went ahead with the Gulf War, which bombed Iraq's industry back to a pre-industrial state and was based on the incubator babies lie, the famous Naira testimony. And then George Bush, obviously doing the crime of the century with the invasion and occupation of Iraq. So yeah, you have the descendants of Nazis running our country and running NATO. So I think it's pretty close to fascism already. But yeah, you see the rise of like white supremacist or right-wing groups, events like Charlottesville and Virginia, more mass shootings that are inspired by white supremacy. It does look like things are devolving somewhat, but I don't know. I think it'll still devolve. I think things are just going to get really bad here until we get our shit together and organize for socialism and people stop, talking about socialism and communism like it's a joke in the US, and they open their eyes to the system around them and what it's doing to them. I think things are going to have to get really bad for that to happen. Realistically, this is my most like doomer nihilist opinion. So I do think things will fall into like sort of chaos or barbarism. But I think that people will ultimately get organized and the working class will take power rather than the country will just devolve into chaos for the next 200-300 years or whatever. Hey, Eddie. Dave Grimes here. How's your day? I'm good. How are you, Dave? Good to see you. Eddie, do you think there's a reason big sporting leagues such as the NFL are rigged? I don't know. I mean, if they're rigged, they're not fully rigged. If they're rigged, it's just like the refs, if they're rigged, it's just the refs are paid off to make different calls, or the administrators, the people who run the game. Because you wouldn't be able to pay off every player. But I don't think they're probably rigged. Maybe though. I feel like nihilism is increasing big time. Yeah, and that's why we need to offer people an alternative. Like, if you believed what McCarthyism had told you, and what a lot of like rad lib pseudo socialists, fake leftists believe and internalize, that we can't have socialism here, that socialism's failed every time it's tried and it's impossible and we should never even try to do a different system than this. Why would you not fall into nihilism, right? Because you look at how bad the system around us is. You look at how exploitative and imperialistic it is. And then if you look at that system and you believe that we can't have anything better, even though that's a completely ahistorical take, in a reactionary position, then why would you not fall into nihilism and just being like, nothing matters? Hello, everyone. Hello, Unparalleled Dev. A shit ton of Gen Z are leaning towards Marxism. Yeah, and that's a product of the material conditions. That's a product of, neoliberalism and the polarization of wealth at the top, concentration of capital. Like, it's crazy. Every giant company, pretty much Vanguard and BlackRock have their hands in and are major owners of. So they're not the only giant investment groups, but you have these giant investment groups that own most of the industry. in the country, and they're merged or connected to the giant banks, Goldman Sachs, and these others who are also, have their hands in every industry. And it fully merged with industrial capital, which is what Lenin calls finance capital, the merger of banks and industry, which leads to capitalist imperialism. Those are the ones running and managing the empire and determining the policy of NATO and the U.S. State Department. A handful of those investment groups, those industrial capitalists and finance capitalists, have merged together and are dominating at the top, and everybody's aware of it. Everybody knows BlackRock and Vanguard own everything, including the healthcare system, which I wrote about in the Journal of American Socialist Studies too, which you can get on our website. But so people are opening their eyes to that. It's more obvious than it was, say, 40 years ago before Ronald Reagan in the era of neoliberalism, when you did actually have a middle class. It was, a middle class that had to be fought for by the unions and by the organized workers who demanded some concessions from the capitalists and from FDR after the Depression. But there was a middle class, and, that middle class and the unions and the labor movement excluded minority groups systematically, excluded Black people systematically. So it was always, this sort of white working class, just used basically to bribe the workers. Here, we'll give you more material well-being. Just don't organize for socialism, please. Don't take your organizing any further. But that middle class has disappeared. Norman Finkelstein has a great way of putting it. He's like, back in the 60s or 70s, when I was a young person organizing or whatever, the working class was so segregated, right? You had white people who were in unions or whatever else, and they were a lot of the times part of the middle class or lived in the suburbs, and they were separate from a lot of the Black people or a lot of the minority communities, a lot of the immigrant workers, who were systematically excluded from the unions, systematically excluded from the welfare system, and beat down by the war on drugs, beat down by the arms of the capitalist state, like the police, and used to keep the prison industrial complex going. So, but nowadays that's changed. And the way Finkelstein explains it, he's like, now, the working class isn't as segregated. You don't have people living separately. People in New York, their roommates are Black, or white people in New York have Black roommates and immigrant roommates, and roommates of different sexual or gender orientations. So they see that their interests are the same, right? Poor white people and poor Black people are starting to see that their interests are the same, so that they can actually unify by class, right? Because what they try and do is keep us divided in any way they can, divided by politics, divided by social issues, divided by race, divided by religion, divided by gender and sexuality, whatever they can divide us by, they want to. But as soon as the working masses of every identity realize that their interests are the same, they can unify and struggle together against the capitalist class, whose interests are diametrically opposed to ours as workers. Your interests aren't diametrically opposed to your coworker because they have a different identity than you, or they have a different sexuality than you, or a different skin color than you. Your interests are the same as them because of your position within the economy. And people are starting to realize that the working class is becoming more cohesive and unified as the ruling class desperately tries to keep us divided with hyper focus on identity politics and racism and all that. But people are seeing through it, right? Because their coworkers are of different identity groups, their roommates are of different identity groups, and they recognize that their interests are the same. And they recognize where minority groups, Black people, immigrants, whoever else, are increasingly oppressed, right? Like if you're in college, I had a Black roommate who took my girlfriend at the time, took her car, borrowed her car like one time, this little red car, and he got pulled over. Right? He got pulled over, and they made him show the license and registration, and gave him a warning or gave the car owner a ticket because the license wasn't up to date. It was expired. There was one of the, registration thing. I don't know if it was the license or the registration or something was expired, and we just needed to go to the DMV and get it renewed. But my girlfriend and I hadn't been pulled over in like a year. We had been driving on expired plates or whatever it was for like a year without ever getting pulled over. And then we give my black roommate the car once, and all of a sudden the cops are pulling him over and making him, making him show them the registration stuff. So now that, the working class is more cohesive, you see people are seeing this stuff happen to their friends, right? They're seeing this stuff happen to their family, the people they know on a day-to-day, or they interact with on a day-to-day basis, and it angers them, right? Rather than being segregated and just shrugging it off and being like, oh, that's not my problem. I live in the suburbs. That's what happens in the ghettos. Everybody is seeing it nowadays. And, part of that's because of technology, but part of it, like Finkelstein says, is because of the concentration of wealth at the top, and then which has caused sort of a concentration of the workers of all different identity groups together at the bottom. Factioning, that's a good word for it. Hey, Eddie, can you react to this 6-minute clearly Western propagandized video that tries to explain the difference between socialism and communism? I would love to. That sounds like a great video to react to. Thank you, Jacob. For those who don't know, you can join our Discord and post videos that you want us to react to in there. I check that usually before streaming. Oh, shoot. Today, I was supposed to shout out all the $10 Patreon members, and I forgot. So let me do that quick. Let me give producer credits to all our patrons. Hello, Moon Factor. How are you? On the rewatch 2 times speed. I'll see you all in a bit. That's awesome. Well, I hope you're almost caught up. See you soon. Let's see here. How do I see all our Patreon members? There it is. All right. So shout out to all of our $10 Patreon people. These are the people who make our project possible. These are the people who pay for the Journal of American Socialist Studies and pretty much everything about our project. They're the reason I have a working microphone and a camera right now, and I can speak to y'all. So thank you to all these patrons. You can also be a $1, $3, or $5 patron if you go to patreon.com/MidwesternMarks, or you can go higher than that. But one of the perks for $10 patrons that we just added is I'm going to give you producer credits and shout outs at the beginning of the stream. So shout out to Alberto Coco, Aiden Saucedo, Alan, Alexander Harrison, Amazaline, Amazaline, Amira Jahinger, Andrew Simmons, Andrew Tibbetts, Andrew Van Schuten, Anna Williams, Anthony Rosenthal, Ariel, Adrina, Augo Doggo, Austin Jones, Austin Williams, Ava Curry, Bemke, Ben Jensen, Benjamin Calvett, Bobby Sperry, Brad Willett, Brady, Brett Knudsen, Brody, Bryce Rafa. My buddy Brody is still a patron. That's awesome. He's been a patron since we started this. He's my friend in real life. BADR with a backwards R. Kalen, Caleb McConaughey, Carlos Dell, KCC, Chance, Chris Secord, Christopher Stombaugh, CJ, CMRD Crow, Cody, Christina Arbalo, CR James, Dakota Tamke, Damian Matthew, Damian Roy, David Barajas, David Burney. Hey, David, how's it going? He's probably in the stream right now. David Johnson might be in the stream too. How's it going, everyone? They're constants on the Discord server. David Rack, Debbie Hode. Hey, Debbie. Dennis, Derek Hayes, Desira Gonzalez. Almost done. This is a lot of people. I didn't realize we had so many $10 patrons. I might have to up it to like 20. DRRD, Elliot Cook, Markson Ewell, Ava, Frank Cardenas, Gabe Glazer, Galactic Beyond, George Duke, Jilly Tice, Glenn Goldman, Hannah Lucia, Horhey, Haken Klepp Norman, Ian Snyder, Iraj Rafiq, Isaac Cohen, Isaiah Madrigal, Itachi the Bolshevik. That's such a cool name, Itachi the Bolshevik. Jack Kelleher, Jacob Thompson. Jacob Thompson is a donor? What a beast. Jake Vitale, James Hugh, Jameson Hubbard, JD, Jeremy Mashal, Jeremy Bishop, Jeremy Watson, Jerry Roos, Jesse McCann, Jesus Alvarez, Jim S., Jim Sutherland, Jonas Berlin, Jordan Little, Joseph Hoffer, Juan Madrigal, Julie P. Oh, shoot. I'm reading all the $10 donors we've ever had. All right. That was going to take forever. I was going to say, we do not have this many current patrons. I'm like, some of these people have definitely canceled their patronship. And like one or two of those people were people that I know like disagreed with something we said and got kind of mad at us about it. And I thought they had stopped being a patron, stopped donating. So that explains it, that it wasn't everyone. But next time I'll get that figured out and I'll get it all written down before I start the stream. But thank you to all those patrons regardless. I'm glad I listed like everyone because shout out to anybody who's ever helped us with our project. But yeah, that's a new thing. CR James, huh? What a sexy name. Yeah, I'm sure a bunch of the people who are Patreons that I just read are also in this chat. How would you explain value to warehouse workers? How do they make value? Like, for example, in the winery and G3 enterprises, do you mean workers who just move commodities around? Workers who transport commodities? Thank you so much for the super chat, by the way, Fernando. This definitely also helps fund our project, of course. But the workers, if they don't alter a commodity, they still add value, right? Because the capitalist and the money he advances, they still have to take into account the transportation of their products, right? The movement of their products through space over a certain amount of time, which Marx goes back and forth on it. Transportation wasn't, the same as it was today, but, there needs to be, there's value that goes directly into the commodities used for transportation, like rail and trains and trucks and anything that transports commodities. And there's also labor that's needed to transport those commodities. So it wasn't, the means of transport and the means of communication weren't as highly developed under the capitalism that Marx was looking at as they were today. But, the capitalist who advances his capital still has to take that transportation into account. And that value that he advances is still going to go into the value of the product, the price of the product. That product's going to have to be sold for more than what the capitalist paid to create the product and to transport the product and to market the product and sell it, which is a huge part of capitalism today. We have salesmen and marketers and stuff that capitalists spend a lot of their money and their surplus on. But I would call those workers essentially agents of circulation, right? Because Marx separates in volume 1 and volume 2 the circulation sphere, the market where commodities are bought and sold, from the production sphere where the commodities are produced. So like those who drive truck or work in a warehouse and help transport the commodities through space are part of the circulation period, right? They're not actually changing the shape of the commodity, which, Marx says that the production period or the production process is the only place where value is actually added. So there's a contradiction there. And Carlos and I have talked about this before, like, is value actually being added to the commodity itself in transportation? And that's a debate within Marxism. But like I said, ultimately, the transportation costs are going to go into the price of the commodity. And ultimately, those workers are absolutely 100% essential for the capitalists to continue with their operations because they need to sell their products. They need to bring it to market. These commodities need to be moved around the warehouse or need to be stocked. So even though those workers might be considered agents of circulation rather than agents of production, they're still vital to the entire capitalist system, which means they're still organizable. They're still part of the working class. It's not just productive industrial workers, which who would tell their giant audience of people that only the productive industrial workers should be considered workers at all? That would be a silly idea. I used to be a $10 patron. Oh, thank you for the super chat again, Fernando. I used to be a $10 Patreon, but unfortunately, due to hard times and labor alienation and exploitation, I can't afford the $1 a month patron. I want to support Midwestern. And it sucks because I want to support Midwest Marks. Please don't worry. Please don't worry. One, if you want to support us financially, just go click on our YouTube ads, right? Just go watch our YouTube videos and make sure you click the ad when you see it. But two, you need your money more than us, right? All we're trying to do is organize the working class against the capitalist class. That's, what we're going to use your money for, which I appreciate you wanting to support that. But if you're part of the working class, if you're being exploited and alienated, like you said, we understand that. That's why we're advocating for you, and we're not going to, beg you to give us your money. There are a million different ways you can support us other than financially. Like, Jacob, you comment on all our stuff. That boosts it in the algorithm. You like all our stuff. You're always in every stream. You're a moderator. Like, there's plenty. You're using your labor and your time and your energy to help Midwestern Marks. Just because you can't support us financially right now, like, please don't feel bad about that at all. Because we do not hold it against you in any way, shape, or form. And you do help the project more than you know. So, if you could automatically be granted fluency in any language, what would you choose? I want to learn Espanol, but it seems hard. Thank you so much for the super chat, GQ. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm learning Spanish right now, Duolingo. Not just Duolingo. I finally have my book. I've been meaning to show y'all this. So my dad is a Spanish teacher, and he knows I'm learning Spanish right now. So he gave me this book, which is about the Cuban Revolution. It's like a Spanish learner. It's called Casa de Vida it's about this rich tobacco capitalist and his family during the revolution, and then also this poor family of peasants who are working in the fields. And one day before the revolution, their little baby daughter gets sick, and they try and take her to the hospital, and they get turned away from the hospital because they're poor after walking like 2 days. And then their boss beats the family who stayed back to work, get beaten and attacked by the boss because their other family members went to take their little baby to the doctor and got turned away, and the daughter dies, the little baby dies. And then the family joins the revolution. And they end up being in Che Guevara's column. So it's a historical fiction, Spanish reader. Very, very cool. Perfect for me. Shout out to my dad for that. He's the man. But if I could be fluent in any language, I'm not getting close to being fluent in Spanish, but I'm getting close to the point where I can like read and write basic things. Like when Nicolas Maduro tweets something, I can understand it without hitting translate this tweet. So I'll just keep going. I don't need to magically learn that one. I'll just keep going and doing it the hard way. And if I could have any language magically supplanted into my head, Chinese probably, so I could go visit China and speak with everyone and speak with all the Marxist academics. Thank you for the super chat and the cool question. That's awesome, LOL. Shout out to Comrade Dad, right? Right. What do you think about Ohio's disaster coverage? I haven't been following it as much as I should. My brother told me about it yesterday. Yeah, I haven't looked into it as much as I should, so I'm not going to comment on it yet. I have some good stuff to cover today, though. I am just going to grab a glass of water real quick, and then I shall return. But I'm going to put on something for y'all to watch, like I always do. Y'all, I can't just leave y'all with nothing. I'm also going to run to the bathroom, so it'll take a second, but I'll give y'all something real entertaining to watch. Real entertaining. The most entertaining thing you've ever watched, in fact. I'm just trying to figure out which one. Here you go. Y'all can watch me wrestle this guy. It's one of my old wrestling matches. Enjoy. BRB real soon. I'm back. I'm back to commentate my own match. Duolingo is good for beginners, but not good for advanced study. No. Use Duolingo before the changes. I loved it. Now it feels way too rigid. Yeah, you definitely need something else. That's what I've told, because my brother and my dad are, my brother's getting a major in Spanish in college. He's in his senior year of it, or he might even be done with it. But he's getting a major, and my dad's a Spanish teacher, obviously. They ask about Duolingo. I'm like, it's good. It's just, you need something else. You're like, I need this book in addition to Duolingo, and then I need, you need to branch off. Like, you can't just learn the language from using Duolingo. So, what did I turn this guy with here? You strung like a bull. Thank you. Thank you. It's right. Oh, I just had a half. Can't believe this guy let me turn him over like that. It's also good to use a variety of techniques. Yes, exactly. For learning Spanish. Definitely appears to be holding. Yes, I was definitely holding. I should have been called here. More proof that the refs are rigged. That was like the semifinals of a tough tournament. It was like, I remember being surprised that I won that match so easy. Okay, let's watch this. I have some videos planned for today, but I think this socialism versus communism video will be pretty good. I just made a TikTok about the difference between socialism and communism. It did pretty well. So obviously this is a topic that people are interested in. Let's check it out. Let me know how the audio is.
Around the beginning of the 19th century, the world, especially Europe, started to change. Machines were used more, animals were used less, and people started migrating to cities. Different people had very different reactions to this, and a lot of different words started getting coined and thrown around to describe people's attitudes towards these changes, two of which would wind up sticking around for a very long time: socialism and communism. These two words were originally used more or less interchangeably to describe a lot of different people with vastly different ideas, like Robert.
I mean, I'm glad they started with the Industrial Revolution. I'm glad they started it from a place of production, right? Like, you have this change in production. You have this change in technology that changes production and therefore changes human societies forever. And that leads to the creation of socialism. The creation of this idea that the productive relations and the productive base conditions, our politics and our superstructure and everything. The ruling economic class is always going to be the ruling political class. That is an idea that largely stemmed at the time of the Industrial Revolution, because massive changes in production were ongoing. And it was changing the way that human societies operated. So that's good, but I can already tell they're talking about socialism and communism like they're just these outdated ideologies, like they still don't make sense anymore, as if the capitalist economic class still isn't the ruling political class anymore, even though it's very obvious that they are. So they try and treat, Marx lived during the Industrial Revolution, so he came up with this crazy idea that the hitherto history of all existing societies is the history of class struggle. But that's stupid. There's no classes today. They just say like it's only an ideology that made sense during the Industrial Revolution, when of course it's not. Marxism is a science that constantly needs to be expanded and change its analysis as the actual system changes. But it's still extremely relevant and still by far the best way to explain the world and the system that we live in today.
Robert Owen, Saint-Simon, Louis Blanc, Pierre Joseph, and plenty of others. All of these guys did focus on some common themes. They all talked about how the onset of the Industrial Revolution was making it possible for a few entrepreneurs to exploit their workers in order to make themselves very rich. And they all talked about how society needed to be radically reorganized in order to make things more fair. But after that, their agreement ended.
It also makes sense that they're starting with Robert Owen, that they're starting with the utopians. Because that is where I was going to grab Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. It's kind of stored behind some stuff back there, so I'm not going to grab it right now. But in Engels' book, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, he starts with Robert Owen, too. He's like, you had these utopian socialists who recognized how bad capitalism sucked, So they tried to make their own like workers communities, but they were always crushed by the capitalists or by the capitalist state. Or, you know, there were various methods that the capitalists used to dismantle these utopian communities. So Marx and Engels say we need to create scientific socialism rather than utopian socialism. We need to transition out of capitalism to socialism via class struggle, rather than just create a utopian socialist community in the middle of capitalism, like a commune, basically.
If not these rich business owners, who should own the factories and how should they be managed? Should we even have property? How should goods be distributed and by who? How should we motivate people to work? Each socialist and each communist from the time would have given you a very different answer. One of the many documents from this early period was the Communist Manifesto. It was written by Karl Marx, who you've probably heard of, and also Friedrich Engels, who you might have, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, according to them, a communist was someone who, among other things,
Who the hell hasn't heard of Engels? Who hasn't heard of Marx and Engels? Like, even if you're not a Marxist, you probably know about who those people are historically. Like, if someone said Marx and Engels, you would know what they were talking about, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm just too lost in the sauce of Marxism, and so I expect everyone to understand it.
wanted abolition of land as private property, free education, the requirement that everyone who can work does work, centralization of banks, communication, transportation, and everything else, I think? It's a little unclear. The way the
Requirement to work. I mean, every society has the requirement to work, right? Because if nobody worked in any society throughout history, everybody in that society would die. They would all perish because they wouldn't have food. So every society has the requirement to work. Marx and Engels just said that we should give people as much free time as we can. We should give them as much free time as technology will allow, right? We know if we control production, we can produce enough for everyone. And we can produce enough for everyone to flourish, right? Like we can put a lot of our labor and energy into things that benefit the working class rather than just create a lot of profit, which is how production is organized now. We can put more into education and more into housing, more into sustainability, things like that. But then, we can reduce the work hours. We can divide things up more rationally. So the dirtiest, the worst, the most time consuming and energy consuming jobs can be divided up. So the people who do those jobs also have time to pursue intellectual pursuits and have time to spend with their family. And have time to play sports or do whatever they want to do. Because the technology that we have, the technology created during the Industrial Revolution that's advanced since then, the productive technology would allow us to create a society like that where everybody's needs are met and everybody has a lot of time to develop themselves as a person. So it's not that everyone, I think by requirement to work, they're making it sound like, Marx and Engels just wanted the government to come in and make everybody work so long as they were physically able to do it at all. When the whole purpose of scientific socialism is not reducing work to nothing, but, not making people spend 40 to 80 hours a week slaving away in the workplace. Labor still needs to be done, right? But that labor changes its form and people know that when they go to work, that it's actually going to be used to benefit the society and benefit the community. And then they don't have to spend all day at work so they can do things, for their own ends.
Everything else, I think? It's a little unclear. The way the document talks about things, it seems like they viewed communism as an extreme type of socialism, where socialists are just anyone who wants to help out the average worker, but communists are people who want to completely overturn the current work does work.
We got to listen to this again.
Centralization of banks, communication, transportation, and everything else, I think? It's a little unclear. The way the document talks about things, it seems like they viewed communism as an extreme type of socialism.
Okay, I have a couple comments. First of all, this is like the textbook example of somebody who just read the manifesto and was like, that's what communism is. I understand communism. This is what Jordan Peterson did. Before he started acting like an expert on Marxism and calling everybody he doesn't like a postmodern neo-Marxist. He read the manifesto. He's like, there you go, I got it. The manifesto was a party program. The manifesto was a party program for a party at the time in the 1800s when Marx and Engels were living. So it was for the working class political parties to say, these are our demands. This is what we want right now, right? Because communism is the idea of, an eventual transition to a classless society, a society where everyone's a worker, rather than this society where you have some owners and some workers, some exploiters and some exploited. Rather, everyone's a worker and we work for the benefit of society rather than having our labor exploited and working for the benefit of a capitalist who doesn't work. But there are, any socialist movement, any socialist political party needs to have a program, needs to have a plan of things we can implement tomorrow, right? Like, we're not utopians, as I was explaining earlier. So we don't believe that you can just transition to socialism or communism tomorrow. It's a transition that takes place over a long, long period of time and a process of development. But there are things that the socialists can offer people right now, right? Like in the US, like nationalizing the healthcare system, right? We're not going to have these price gouging insurance companies. We're not going to have these giant pharmaceutical companies lording over you and exploiting you and getting you addicted to opioids for the purpose of their own profit and putting profit over healthcare. In every instance. This is something I'm passionate about. I wrote my recent journal article about it. Check out the Journal of American Socialist Studies too. Studying healthcare administration, getting a grad degree in that right now. The system is completely broken. It needs to be completely nationalized. 60% of Americans, at least, that's a low estimate, experience medical debt at some point in their lives. It's, our healthcare system is supposed to help heal our country, but instead it's a burden on our country that traps people in debt. So any socialist or communist party that wants to eventually transition to communism, part of their program, part of their plan in the US should be, we're going to nationalize healthcare on day one, or we're going to move to nationalize healthcare on day one, and here's how we're going to do it. So that's what these demands in the manifesto are, right? That's what Marx and Engels are saying when they give the workers explicit political demands in the manifesto. Like, this is what we can do tomorrow. Right? If we take power, this is the stuff we can start doing immediately or start working towards tomorrow, right? Not just abolishing classes overnight, because we recognize that's impossible, but nationalizing certain industries and investing them in the people. So then people take the party program from the 1800s and just say, this is what communism is. And then they say, it's not very clear, though. And that's what this guy in this video said. It's not very clear. Well, it is clear. But you read the 30-page manifesto, the 30-page party program, instead of the 3,000 pages of Capital that I have sitting up there, or the extra 1,200 pages that are in the Grundrisse, where Marx and Engels lay this out much more fully and in depth in the way that I just explained. But I guess it's just easier to read 30 pages and say that you've done it, or you've done all the homework. And then this next part is interesting too. I'm going to pause it again here.
The way the document talks about things, it seems like they viewed communism as an extreme type of socialism, where socialists are just anyone who wants to help out the average worker, but communists are people who want to completely overturn the current social order.
Where does that idea come from? I don't even know where you would get that idea in the manifesto. Where do they draw this hard distinction between socialism and communism? Like, really, this idea that that socialism and communism are two separate stages, that does exist in Marx, but it's really hammered out in Lenin's State and Revolution, right? Once Marx comes up with his theory of the dictatorship of the proletariat, you could say that the theory exists, that there is a transition, that socialism is a transitionary state out of capitalism that will eventually reach communism. Right, but the manifesto was written before that. The manifesto was written before the Paris Commune, where Marx, came up with this term, coined this term, the dictatorship of the proletariat, that moves society to socialism, and then socialism eventually leads to communism, the classless society. So at this time, in Marx's early years, he was saying that as soon as the worker sees power, you have communism. Right. And then as the society develops, you're just moving to a higher and higher stage of communism. They thought they were going to be able to take the means of production into their own hands a lot faster, which they might have been able to if the European worker seized the means of production back in Marx's day. You wouldn't have had the development of imperialism to its current point, which prevents socialism from developing. But I digress. It's pretty theoretical. But either way, Marx was not making this hard distinction between socialists and communists, let alone that communists were people who want to tear down the whole society, and socialists are just people who want to help the workers. Like, what? That sounds like the way that Bernie Sanders described socialism. You know, we're socialists. We just want to help out the workers a little bit. We're not like communists like Cuba, which maybe that's where they're getting this idea.
Now, this document became incredibly influential, but the terminology it uses, with communist as a particularly radical subset of socialist, didn't really catch on. The word communism fell out of favor, and people started describing themselves mostly by how much they agreed with Marx. So instead of communism as a subset of socialism, we wound up with Marxism.
I feel like you could read Wikipedia and you would get a better idea than this. I mean, maybe historically, but in some places like Germany, where the communists called themselves social democrats, but like there were a lot of communists at the time, a lot of communist workers, and then you had the Russian Revolution just a handful of years later, not a handful, but a few decades later, not a few decades, several decades later, in 1917, and then you have the Communist Party take power in China, and a third of the world is run by communist parties. So what do you mean it fell out of favor? It didn't. Maybe in Western Europe, according to bourgeois ideologues and propagandists, but communism was a specter haunting Europe at the time. It did not fall out of favor, and in fact, it was able to, like I said, a third of the world was run by communist governments. And then, so Marxism is the idea that we have workers take power, dictatorship of the proletariat. And then they transition to the classless society, and you could call the transitionary state in between capitalism and communism socialism. That's generally the way that Marxists have conceptualized it, even though Marx doesn't necessarily say that specifically or explicitly. But that's the idea. So Marxism includes socialism and communism, but then they just divide it up in this weird way and make their little graphic here, where they're like, communism's a subset of socialism that wasn't very popular, so it started to be called Marxism. Like, what? Please, what are you talking about? Socialism and communism are both ideas that should be subsumed under Marxism if you're talking about scientific socialism, which is we are.
As a subset of socialism. Over the course of the 1800s, a lot of countries in Europe started getting a lot more democratic, and political parties started forming to compete in elections. A lot of these political parties were socialist, and they tended to be dominated by Marxists, especially the SDP in Germany. Here's the problem, though. A big part of orthodox Marxism was the belief that the working class would have to revolt in a glorious, violent revolution because the ruling bourgeoisie would never willingly relinquish power. So the fact that Marxists were actually winning some elections wound up kind of discrediting Marxism. In response,
I'm going to jump out of the window. I can't handle this. Marx encouraged Marxists and communists and socialists, which to him are all the same thing, pretty much, to participate in elections, to participate in bourgeois elections. Yes, a lot of countries were becoming liberal democracies, right? They were having more political democracy, but Marx said we'll never have true political democracy without economic democracy. And then the bourgeois political system is never going to allow us to fully take power via elections, right? You're not just going to be able to have communists, socialists, Marxists run for enough elections and take power and transition the government to a socialist government. And nicely, because the reactionaries and the propagandists and the capitalists will kill you, or control the media and destroy your campaign, or rig the election against you like they did to Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020 with the DNC collaboration with Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. But Marx never said don't run for office, right? Because you can be in the debates. You can go door knocking, door to door, and spread socialist communist ideas. You can win the election and even be able to push for socialist communist policies while in office. But the idea that we can never just have enough people be elected in order to take political power and then transition to socialism. That's been proven true. Look at that hasn't discredited Marxism, as they say. Look at the Bernie campaigns in 2016 and 2020. Look at AOC, what she's doing right now, cozying up to Nancy Pelosi, cheering on the NATO proxy war in Ukraine, and refusing to fight for anything like Medicare for all, right? So for Marxists, campaigns and bourgeois elections dominated by the bourgeois legal system, are a way to spread our ideas, right? To get to the masses and spread our political program. But we understand that they're never going to let us just take power that way, right? They're never going to let us take power unless we have the masses organized on the ground and we change the bourgeois political system to a political system that actually gives the people the power, that actually brings the people democracy. And that idea has not discredited Marxism, nor, I mean, it's been proven more and more true as time has passed. You can talk about countries like Venezuela, where they took power via election, but even in Venezuela, they've done what Lenin says you need to do in State and Revolution, which is transform the state machinery. And, you know, a lot of people would argue that Venezuela needs to do more as far as transforming the state machinery and moving the surplus into the hands of the workers, me included. But they did that by having the workers organized at the grassroots en masse. Like when the U.S. came and kicked Hugo Chavez out of power after he won the election, things really changed in Venezuela. The working class realized they needed to be armed and organized, or the reactionaries weren't going to let them have this electoral form of socialism. And then they created like the People's or the Popular Assembly, whatever it's called, to try and give the people more direct access and control the government. Then they created this massive commune system where the people were organized into communes and they made not only local political decisions, but they had direct input with national political decisions. Basically saying that they changed the way that the state machinery functioned. They smashed the ready-made state machinery, as Lenin would say, or didn't fully smash it, but they started to change it so that it can actually bring democracy to the workers. Which is, you know, there's no point in Marx where he actually says taking power via elections is impossible, right? He never says that it's not even a possibility at all. He just says it needs to be a revolutionary struggle, in that the workers need to be organized at the grassroots and they need to be armed and connected and unified in their struggle if you're going to take political power at all. So it's not like Marx was looking at Marxists getting elected and saying, you know, I hate this. I hate Marxists running for political campaigns. We need a revolution because that's what my book said, right? If it was shown that workers could run for political office and win and start transitioning society to socialism, Marx would have embraced that. He would have been like, sweet, cool. It's going to be easier than I thought. But he understood that the reactionaries would never allow that, which has been proven right by time. So he said, you need a revolutionary struggle. That probably wasn't the most concise way for me to explain that. But that was just a really, really dumb and ahistorical point and a theoretical point.
Other, more moderate forms of socialism started popping up, like Fabianism in the UK. The Fabian socialists believed that the average worker would benefit best by a slow, peaceful, gradual transition to a more equitable, state-directed economy, and they would become very influential in the early days of the average worker would benefit best by a slow, peaceful, gradual transition to a more equitable, state-directed economy, and they would become very influential in the early days of the British Labour Party. Meanwhile, in Russia, things were taking a different turn. The leader of the Russian Revolution, Vladimir Lenin, disagreed with orthodox Marxists on some issues, but unlike the more moderate social...
What did that say? There was a rise in Reformism at the time, and you have this thinker like Edward Bernstein, who actually takes Marxism after Marx is dead, or maybe Bernstein and Marx lived at the same time. But either way, Bernstein said, we don't need a revolutionary struggle. We just need to win elections, right? We need to win parliamentary elections, congressional elections, whatever, and then take power that way. We don't need a revolutionary struggle. And this is an anti-Marxist idea for the reasons I just explained. You do need a revolutionary struggle, even if it's not this violent, glorious uprising that Marx never ever described once in his life, right? Revolution doesn't necessarily mean a bunch of violence and destruction. Revolution just means a revolutionary change, a change in the political structure and the economic structure from capitalist to socialist, however that comes about. But Bernstein was saying, let's just run elections. Let's not do revolution, even if revolution is the best option. Right. So that's the difference. It's not that Marx and Lenin were saying, only revolution because that's what our book said. That's what we predicted. Right. If it was possible to take power via elections, Marx and Lenin would have been like, awesome, great, let's do it. But it was being proven time and time again that socialism wasn't going to come about via just electing enough AOC type politicians or whatever, to use a modern example. So Lenin started stressing the revolutionary struggle and started stressing what Marx had said about bourgeois capitalist elections and the capitalist political system, and how they're never going to let the working class actually take power, how the political system is rigged against the working masses. So you need a revolutionary, unified, organized struggle where the workers are armed so that they can protect themselves. That's the idea. And Bernstein said no revolution, only elections. Marx, Engels, Lenin said elections are fine. Revolutions are probably the only thing that's going to actually work and take power, though. And of course, Lenin was 100% right about that if you look at how the Russian Revolution played out. But, they weren't like against elections the same way that Bernstein was against revolutionary struggle or a revolutionary uprising. They were okay with elections, as long as it's just being used to push Marxism. Like there were Bolsheviks who would run for office, right? There were people in Lenin's party in the government or doing that kind of stuff. So what do you mean he was completely against elections in any way, shape, or form?
Socialists gaining ground in Europe, he still believed that revolution was the leader of the Russian Revolution. Vladimir Lenin disagreed with orthodox Marxism.
Capitalism is a necessary stage of the evolution of society is my ass. Okay. I really wanted to see what they said Lenin and Marx disagreed upon. And they say Lenin says that capitalism isn't a necessary stage in the evolution and development of society, which I don't know that Marx says that, right? Marx just, the only prediction that Marx got wrong was he thought the places where capitalism developed first would be the places where there were socialist revolutions first. But Lenin develops his theory of imperialism, says these capitalist countries are going to oppress these other countries where the workers will rise up first. Countries like Russia that had never developed capitalism, right? They had manufacturing and they had some capitalist industry, but it was mostly a feudal country or a semi-feudal country. So they had some manufacturing and industry in the cities, but then there were tons of peasants ruled by landlords. And then they didn't have a democracy or a liberal democracy, the capitalist political structure. They had a monarchy. They had a monarchy dominated by the czars. So Lenin said the working masses, the peasants and the workers, not just the industrial workers who Marx talked about, but the peasants as well, should ally together and overthrow the monarchy and transition to socialism. Now, because they hadn't transitioned to capitalism, they didn't have that much industry, right? They were mostly an agrarian society, so they basically had to level skip the transition through capitalism. They had to industrialize their country, which the Soviet Union at the time did faster than any other country in human history. And they did it without slavery, which the UK and the US needed. But yes, he did, come up with the worker peasant alliance, which wasn't something Marx talked about. So it wasn't necessarily a disagreement, though, because Marx never said it will only be the industrial workers, or he never said, for sure that, only in European countries where capitalism developed first, those will 100% be the first to transition. That's just where he was living and where capitalism had developed and where the workers were starting to rise up already. So he made that prediction. But he would have loved Lenin's worker peasant alliance. He would have been like, what a great idea, Vlad.
Marxists on some issues, but unlike the more moderate socialists gaining ground in Europe, he still believed that revolution was the only way forward. Lenin and his followers broke off from the Russian Socialist Party and named themselves the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which, as far as I can tell, was the beginning of a revival of the word communist. It seems like they were using it in much the same way Marx had, as a way to separate themselves from other, more moderate socialists. After they gained power, a split formed in socialists around the world. On one hand were those who wanted to follow the example of the Soviet Union, who began calling themselves communists. They frequently formed their own parties specifically to challenge other socialists, and sometimes they were really successful. On the other hand, there were other socialists. Some were hardcore Marxists and some were more moderate gradualists, but
this is kind of true, I just don't know how they're talking about this without mentioning Bernstein, right? Because Bernstein was the guy who really created what this guy is describing as socialism, this idea that we don't need a revolutionary struggle. You also have John Maynard Keynes, the economist, who said capitalism will kind of transition to socialism on its own, also through elections and other means. But they need to mention the theoretical basis of this idea. They're just saying this is socialism, and Lenin and all the crazy revolutionaries are communists. They need to mention Bernstein, who, took Marxism, because Lenin, deeply understood Marxism. And, there was nowhere where he really strongly disagreed with Marx. He just added on to Marx. He added on, we can have the worker peasant alliance. Capitalism eventually develops into a stage of imperialism. These were additions to the science of Marxism, based on how capitalism had developed since Marx's death and based on the conditions that Lenin was living in. But he, the basis for everything he said was Marxism. It wasn't like he was this separate entity, this separate thing from Marx. A good way to describe it that I've heard is Marxism is the fist and Leninism is the motion of the fist that throws the punch. Leninism is, how do we put Marxism into action and actually take power? But then you have Bernstein, who was, distinct from Marx, who did have a theory distinct from Marx, who said, no, we don't need a revolutionary struggle. Socialists will eventually win enough elections and we'll just peacefully transition out of capitalism. Obviously has been proven false, has been proven wrong with history. Anybody who worked for the Bernie campaign can tell you that in the U.S. that the capitalists in our country are not going to let you, not just going to let socialism take power by voting for the right guy. But yeah, I don't know. The video should mention Bernstein.
But they all thought that the Soviet Union was a terrible example to follow. During World War II, there was an uneasy alliance between...
And what does that sound like today? Well, we like socialism. Socialism's good, just not any existing socialist country, not any country in the global south or the east who's actually trying socialism. We just need to do it in the West electorally, and then that'll be real socialism. It's just like the social democrats and pseudo-socialists of today. Usually this phenomena historically and today stems from the academy. It's academics who are like, yeah, Marx was right about all this stuff. Marxism's a great method and tool of analysis. But I don't want all that revolutionary stuff because that's dangerous and scary, and I'm comfortable in my position at the college I work at. So that's usually where this anti-revolutionary Bernsteinian Marxism stems from.
Socialists, capitalists, and communists, as they all struggled against their common enemies. But when that was over and the Cold War started, socialists around Europe started becoming progressively more moderate. They started defining themselves as democratic socialists, people who, yes, wanted some government control over industry, but were committed to doing so by democratic means, unlike the communists in the USSR. The Labour Party won the 1945 election in Britain on a socialist platform, and
it's actually the opposite, though. The reason the Bolsheviks were successful in the USSR was because they actually had popular support, right? The Mensheviks were allying with the capitalists. These sort of pseudo-socialists were allying themselves with the bourgeoisie and saying, oh, we're not actually going to change that much. We're not actually going to transition that much. Not much will change for the wealthy in Russia, right? They were starting to move towards that direction. We're not actually going to shatter the state machinery and build something new that serves the workers. We'll just slowly kind of transition out of it. And basically, they wanted to keep the ruling minority in power when the vast majority of the country wanted a new system. They wanted to smash the monarchy and build something new. So the reason the Mensheviks and these electoral socialists in Russia were trying to keep power using the claim of democracy, the same way capitalists always do. We have a democracy. You can't have an uprising. You can't change the system that is not actually a democracy that always keeps the wealthy in power. You have to leave that system the same and change it democratically. It doesn't make any sense. But because Lenin knew that the Bolsheviks had the mass support, not only of the industrial workers, but also the peasants in the country, they knew that they would be able to seize power and transform the state machinery into something that actually served the workers. And he was proven correct. So, just because the pseudo-socialists and these Mensheviks at the time use these words like democracy doesn't mean they're actually the ones arguing for democracy. Lenin was the one actually arguing for democracy. He was the one actually arguing for to change the system towards a system that served the masses. And it was the Mensheviks and the Bernsteinians and the Reformists, as Lenin would call them, who wanted to keep the ruling class in power using democracy as a justification. Yeah.
And the UK didn't exactly turn into Russia. They created a national healthcare system and nationalized major utilities, and when they lost the elections to the Conservatives in 1951, they peacefully relinquished power. In Germany, the Marxist SDP had become one of Germany's most powerful political parties, but after losing a few elections in a row really badly, they basically completely rewrote their platform, giving up.
Are you not going to mention how all the Marxists and socialists in the German Social Democratic Party were killed by fascist paramilitaries? How all the revolutionaries like Rosa Luxemburg were murdered by collaborations between the fascists, the people who would eventually bring Hitler to power, and the pseudo-socialists, these supporters of democracy that you're talking about, allied themselves with the fascists to kill revolutionaries like Rosa Luxemburg? And you're not even going to mention that history. You're just going to say they started losing elections, so they threw out Marxism. I mean, come on. This is so ahistorical. And that, I mean, if you look at what happened in the UK, where the Labour Party was trying to take power via elections and they were eventually ousted. I mean, yeah, China and the Soviet Union were able to consolidate support of the peoples, consolidate support of the masses in their revolutionary struggle. China is still around today, still the largest socialist country in the world, and now one of the largest economies in the world that's abolished poverty. The Soviet Union eventually fell, but it lasted much longer than any sort of socialism that was in the UK. Which was actually just social democracy that came about because of economic crisis and mass worker struggle from the bottom up. But either way, now the UK is this neoliberal hellhole ever since Thatcher, and the NHS is being dismantled, and workers and ambulance workers and nurses are on strike. So they totally reverted to neoliberal capitalism to the point where the workers are ready to rise up again. Versus China, actually did transition to socialism. The Soviet Union actually did transition to socialism. So how do you not realize in laying all this stuff out that Lenin was right?
Up on Marxism and instead embracing a moderate form of socialism where government would protect the rights of workers while still allowing the existence of capitalism, what they called a social market economy. All across Europe, socialism stopped meaning complete overthrow of current capitalist institutions and started meaning more government influence over the economy than exists right now. Meanwhile, in the United States,
I got to read Thomas Reagan's book on Eurocommunism because I don't know the history of Europe super well and whether, this is actually what happened with the word socialism. I know it did start to move towards reformism, and there was tons of CIA, bourgeois, MI6 infiltration of the socialist movements and of socialist academics. And Thomas Reagan, who writes for our website, has a book about it, about Eurocommunism and how things started to change. But
States, things were
but also, if you look, how are those welfare states doing today, right? How is this capitalist socialist hybrid where we do things for the workers while allowing capitalists to keep exploiting them? In all those countries where that happened, the social safety net's been dismantled. One, the social safety net was only implemented because of class struggle, right? It was only implemented because the workers were unionized and organized and said, you better give us some concessions or we're going to overthrow the system. But now all those concessions are being repealed. They're all being dismantled by the capitalist class because that's how capitalism works. Because Marx was right, even though this person keeps saying Marxism has been discredited. All these predictions about the need for revolutionary struggle and capitalism's tendency to concentrate and accumulate wealth and power at the top, which will eventually lead the workers to rise up. And capitalism's tendency to dismantle the social safety net that the workers gain via class struggle have all been proven right with time.
Worked out a bit differently. We had our own socialist party for a while, and during the first few decades of the 20th century, it even got a few congressmen elected. But socialism existed for us at the same time as progressivism, a much more moderate movement that wound up being very influential in the early days of the US's left wing, while the Socialist Party basically just kinda died out. Later, during the Cold War, the words socialist and communist both became permanently linked to our arch nemesis, the USSR, and ever since, the two words have been treated basically like curse words in American politics. So today, we we wound up in a bit of a weird semantic situation, where socialist might just mean vaguely left-wing, or it might mean Soviet freedom-hating Russian, depending on exactly who you talk to. A confusing mess, which I hope this video has made at least a little more clear.
It didn't at all, I'm sorry. Even if your intentions were good, I mean, if your intentions were good, I hate to tell you that you have failed. You need to do more research. I don't expect you to read all 3 volumes of Capital, but I do expect you to know who Edward Bernstein is. I'm sorry. You can't talk about reformism and the split between Lenin and the reformists without talking about Bernstein. Like, come on now. CIA destroyed social. That's how the video ends, really? Yeah, it is. CIA destroyed socialism in the West. Yeah, that's the other thing they don't mention. They need to read Gabriel Rockhill. They don't mention that the CIA was supporting, and the MI6 in the UK was supporting any and every academic who would say, yeah, I'm a Marxist, yeah, I'm a socialist, but I don't think the workers should rise up against the government. That's violent and mean. You know, we should just participate in elections. We should just vote for the Democratic Party over and over and over again. And eventually, somehow, we'll magically get socialism. This is an idea that the ruling class has always, always, always loved, right? Because a lot of academics recognize that Marxism is a great tool of analysis. They recognize that dialectical materialism really helps you understand and see the world and understand capitalism. So the CIA encourages academics to be like, yeah, I'm a dialectical materialist, but revolution is too mean and too bad and too undemocratic. So let's just keep the current system and cross our fingers and hope socialism comes about eventually. It's always been a useful idea for the ruling class. And it's always been an idea that the CIA and the MI6 have injected into the academy, injected into the colleges, the institutions of higher education, like I was saying before. Because they know a lot of those people, while they can be intellectual leaders, right, and while they can be huge tools for educating the working masses, a lot of academics are comfortable, right? And, you know, if an academic can get paid a whole bunch of money and be a superstar thinker like Adorno and Horkheimer and a lot of these Frankfurt School pseudo-Marxist thinkers, they're going to do that because that's a great way to make money and be famous and be successful under the current system without actually attacking the way that the current system functions. It's so easy to be an opportunist. That video was a trip, LOL. It was. It really was. Bullshit asymmetry principle. The amount of energy needed to refute BS is an order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it. Facts. Facts. Yeah, that took me forever to break down that video. And the video itself was, what, 6 minutes long? Soviet freedom-hating Russian. That video made me want to bash my brains in, literally. I wonder what would happen if South and Central American socialist governments were allowed to exist. No kidding. Or African as well. Like all these places that have started moving towards socialism and started moving towards development have had their people massacred and tortured. And now you see, you know, Latin America's moving towards socialism again. We're having this pink wave / red wave that's reemerging. Yeah, there are a lot of Marxists and socialists, you know, running for office, doing the electoral struggle thing. And we're not against that, right? We think there is a need for class struggle from the bottom up and revolutionary struggle. And ultimately, you need to change the way that the government works, because right now the government is controlled by the capitalist class and designed to keep power in the hands of the capitalist class. So you need to change, you know, the structure of how it works, whether you do that via a revolutionary uprising or by, you know, a revolutionary uprising combined with electoral politics and controlling the electoral system. That'll make it harder to do. But either way, we're seeing the resurgence of socialism in Latin America, despite Operation Condor, despite the U.S. torturing and killing anybody with a socialist ideology to try and root the whole idea of socialism and root Marxism out of this entire continent. And they still weren't able to do it, right? It's still, the class struggle is still going on. The struggle for socialism is still going on. So yeah, Marx has been proven right by history. Faux show. I love what's happening in South America right now. Same. Makes me concerned for their leaders, though. Facts. Would you go on the Majority Report with Sam Cedar to talk communism and progressives in Congress? Yes, I would love to do that. I would love to do that so much. I've been following the Majority Report somewhat closely for a long time. I know exactly what they do. I know exactly what they are, their positions. I know exactly what the main debates are between Majority Report and, say, like RBN, the Revolutionary Blackout Network, who we love. So I would love to do that. Well, my hope with Africa is that the support from China will build the entire continent into a powerhouse. I mean, it will. You have so much mineral wealth in Africa and so much productive capacity and productive potential. But U.S. imperialism, as Lenin points out in his book Imperialism, or Capitalist Imperialism, has just siphoned the resources out of Africa and prevented them from developing, prevented them from harnessing the productive power that's beneath the earth and all around them. So with China doing the opposite, with China giving these developmental loans that's going to allow infrastructure and industry to flourish and develop in Africa, it's going to create a lot of changes in the world. And it's going to create a lot of class struggle and socialist struggle in Africa as the proletariat there is strengthened by the development of industry. That's part of the reason Lenin, sorry, I'll go to that super chat in a second. That's part of the reason Lenin came up with the Worker-Peasant Alliance. He said, we're never going to transition to capitalism so long as we're under the boot of capitalist imperialism, because we can't industrialize. We can't develop our industry. So no industrial working class can even come about here. We need to get the peasants to help, the agricultural workers to help. Otherwise, there won't be a revolution at all. So with China helping Africa develop their productive forces, that is going to create this proletarian class, this directly exploited working class of industrial workers who can then unify and overthrow the bourgeoisie. Because ultimately, Marxism is how the development of technology and the development of production leads to changes in the relations of production. So China, by helping Africa develop their productive capacity, develop their industry, is going to lead to changes in the relations of production naturally. Video react suggestion: why communism will never work with Dr. Paul King or Pints from Aquinas. It's very bad. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I'll watch that today because I don't think I'll have enough time. And I would like to preview it, like watch it before I respond to it. If it's something like, what's the difference between socialism and communism? I'll just, I don't need to prepare much for it, but that sounds like a video I want to prepare for a little bit. Maybe not. Why communism will never work sounds pretty stupid. But let's see here, Dr. Paul Kinger. So because you sent the super chat, I really appreciate that. And because this sounds like an interesting video, I will respond to it at some point. Oh, wait, this is only 30 seconds. You know what? Screw it. Let's do it today. So whoever wanted me to go on Sam Cedar's show, by the way, how do I get on? How do I do it? I don't know. I don't know how to get onto his show. It's a 5-minute video, but yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah. The stuff I was saying before doesn't really apply. I do want to react to that. First, I want to show this, though, while we still got Cobra Commander in the chat. This is something Cobra Commander shared on Twitter. This is the guy behind Wikipedia articles, Stephen Pruitt. He's edited over 6 million articles. He's a libertarian whose family fled from Soviet Poland, which means his family was probably fascists. Hope this clears up all the anti-communist misinformation on Wikipedia. And then someone else said this guy has actually done work for ICE as well, the armed body of the state that serves just to deport immigrant workers in the U.S. So this is the guy editing a lot of Wikipedia articles. So, when libertarians or reactionaries cite Wikipedia, this is who they're citing, and this is why we don't use Wikipedia and why we call them out about that. But yeah, ultimately, this is why you can't trust Wikipedia. And there's so much State Department and NGO money that goes into controlling the narrative on Wikipedia. It's not edited by the people, edited by the masses. It's a perfect example of what happens when you try and implement something that's democratic under a capitalist system, right? We're going to have Wikipedia, this website that the people can edit. The masses can edit it and make sure that it's accurate and fact check each other. And then the people with money, the NGOs and the corporations and the capitalists say, no, we're going to use our money to control that. We're going to use our money to hire people to put what we want on there. And this institution that was supposed to be democratic and be for the people is transformed into one controlled by the capitalists, because in our system as a whole, the capitalists are still the ones who have the power. They have money, which can buy pretty much everything in a society that commodifies everything. There's a guy in my politics class whose family was from Czechoslovakia, and he unironically tried to tell me that communism was bad because they had no burgers. Another place where communism defeated fascism, and people would be like, my family fled communist Czechoslovakia. It's like, your family might have been fascistic reactionaries. I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, that's the interesting Wikipedia story. Let's watch why communism will never work real quick. Sorry, I need to speed up this video. I didn't speed up the last one. That was a mistake. I should have sped it up times 100 so I didn't actually have to watch it.
Because one thing that struck me as a layman reading the Communist Manifesto was, okay, so you've got the proletariat who are much more numerous.
Stop sending me videos of people who have only read the manifesto. What is this? Well, I mean, at least they're honest about it, but come on, people. Like, if you're studying Marx, you should at least know that Marx wrote way more than the manifesto, right? And you should at least be humble. Like, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I've only read this 30-page party program that Marx created for the Communist Party in the 1800s. I haven't read the, 3,000 plus pages of Capital where he actually lays out his theories. No, it's like, one of the things I learned reading the manifesto was that Marx was really stupid and evil, and he just, wanted the workers to eat puppies and kill people for no reason. So I'm a pretty smart intellectual after reading that 30-page pamphlet. Come on. There's no intellectual rigor in the U.S. There's so many academic and intellectual frauds running around, acting like they're well-read or acting like they, rigorously study the things that they talk about. And it's never the case. It's just intellectual laziness everywhere.
Than the bourgeoisie. We are going to take the private property of the bourgeoisie and somehow inherit it for a time. But if there's a lot more of the proletariat than the bourgeoisie, you're not all fitting into their private property. So who's kind of agreeing to live in the nice places?
Oh my gosh, this is like when Sacha Baron Cohen tried to prank Bernie Sanders, and he was like, why don't we just take the 99% and move them into the 1%? And Bernie's like, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? Because they're statistics. So if you can't take 99% and move them into the 1%. It would just create a different 1%. He's like, yeah, but so the majority of people are the 99%. What if we took them and put them in the 1%? And Bernie's trying to explain to him how that's not what socialism is. Here's this academic, this white podcaster guy making that Sacha Baron Cohen prank argument, but he's serious about it.
While the others choose not to.
Right.
And the point is, the practical application isn't there.
And especially
tearing
today.
Down something, yeah, that's attractive. Let's blow this thing up. Yeah.
In fact,
then how do you build it?
So using these definitions, I would say in America today, there's more bourgeoisie than proletariat, especially if you're defining bourgeoisie as
What? I was trying to pause it before he said that, and then I hear that there's more proletariat than bourgeoisie in America today. There are more Vanguard and BlackRock investors than there are people who sell their labor to work to survive every day. No, dude, my mind is so blown. I forgot what they said before that. What did they say before that? Oh, the practical application. That's right. So I'm reading volume 2 right now. Right, and in volume 1, Marx lays the basis for his critique and his critique of capitalist production. But volume 2, he starts to talk about circulation, the circulation of capital, and how money works, how the banks work. And it starts to get really, really, really complex. And what you realize he's doing is he's laying out the science needed for economic calculation, for economic planning, right? For planning a system of production that isn't market production, right? For creating a planned system where the people can decide how goods and services are produced themselves. He's creating the mathematical equations and the calculations that you would need to plan something out like this, or to even reproduce a capitalist economy. You know, he's also giving mathematical equations to understand circulation in the current capitalist economy, so we can know how to transition out of this to a socialist system. So while Marx didn't, predict the future a lot, he analyzed the capitalist system around him and said, it's the job of the working masses to seize power from the capitalists and then, create their society. I'm not going to predict exactly how that's going to happen. I'm not going to explain how it's going to happen step by step, because that's the work of history and we can never perfectly predict reality, right? While he did that, he also left the workers tools for planning a system of production, for planning an economy, right? He created the scientific basis for building socialism if you get into Capital's volume 2 and 3. But these guys who are going to pretend they're experts on Marxism now have only read the manifesto, the 30-page manifesto. So how do they know this? They don't. They don't know what they're talking about, but they're still going to open their fat mouths, spew a bunch of nonsense, and then upload it to YouTube for the whole public to see. Right? If you read volume 2, you would know that it's not all theoretical, that Marx did lay the basis for socialist calculation, and you're lying to people. You are intellectual frauds.
As like the owning class that these people are doing.
Yeah.
I mean, far more people in America are owners than private property owners.
Class.
Yeah.
Neil is my proletariat.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna jump out my window again. I own a microphone. I own, I don't own my house. I rent my house, but I have this house. I'm a capitalist too. I'm the bourgeoisie. I own private property. Like, what do you think people back in Marx's day just lived like on the street? They all just sat around waiting to go work for the capitalist class? Of course, people own some kind of property. What people don't do is make their entire living by paying others to work on the property that they own. Right? That's the bourgeoisie. And yes, America does have more petty bourgeoisie. They have more middle class, small business owners than a lot of countries. And there's a big petty bourgeoisie culture. But the petty bourgeoisie needs workers to work for them too. Right? So there's always going to be more workers than there are going to be capitalists. It just doesn't make, because the capitalists need the wages or the labor of workers to make money at all. Without labor, they make no money. So you can never have all capitalists. There will be nobody to work the land that the capitalists own. How could you say this and not have that occur to you? How could that not occur to you? If you say the majority of Americans are bourgeoisie, well, then who's working the land? Right? Or do you even know how Marx defines private property? Or do you just think private property is like your toothbrush and communism is when the state comes and takes your toothbrush?
Your wage slave,
unless he hires somebody.
But Neil owns stuff.
Damn it,
right?
Neil.
And as soon as he
couldn't do that.
As soon as he becomes a homeowner, is he a bad guy? Is he part of the owning class?
Yeah, then he would be. I suppose. Certainly, if he was to rent anything.
Yeah, they would be. That's a great point. No, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't. Just look up how Marx defines private property. Like, yes, you would be, because you own this podcast. This podcast is your capital. The microphone and the camera and the things you use are the means of production, right? And you put your own labor into that. So maybe you could be petty bourgeoisie, small business owner, whatever. If your podcast is successful, you're making probably a small amount of surplus. And yes, the cameraman is your worker. The people who work on set are your workers. Their labor is being used to make profit for you. And you're paying them a fraction of what their labor creates through wages. But then they say the cameraman himself owns stuff, or could become a homeowner, and then he's part of the bourgeoisie too. No. First of all, the person who owns the podcast, that's really irrelevant, right? You can have your podcast. You're still not like Vanguard or BlackRock or the Goldman and Sachs or these banks who own the vast majority of the economy and produce the means of subsistence, produce everything we need to survive, and hoard those things so that if we want them, we have to sell our labor to them, right? You're just running a podcast, so you own a tiny little amount of capital that creates probably some extra income for you unless it's really successful. So that's not what Marx was talking about, and he acknowledges that the petty bourgeoisie, the small business owners, can ally with the workers against the capitalists. This is something that Marxists have discussed throughout history. It's in the CPUSA's party platform on like the second page. So that's different than the bourgeoisie proper. That's why Marx creates this word called petty bourgeoisie, small bourgeoisie, petite bourgeoisie, to describe a different class of people, different from the capitalist manufacturers and banks. But then your cameraman, like that, it's an even more ridiculous argument to say your cameraman's bourgeoisie if he buys a house or if he owns stuff. Private property is land that you own that you pay others to work, right? It's the means of production that you own, the raw materials that you buy to have your workers work on so you can eventually sell it and make a surplus, make millions of dollars in profit, the way that Vanguard and BlackRock and the actual bourgeoisie who dominate capitalist society in the US, the way that they do it. Right? Buying a house, you're not making any money from a house. You live in the house. You use it. Right? The house doesn't make you any money. Private property is stuff that you buy, combine it with labor, and then the products of it you sell, and you make more money. Right? You don't make money from a glass of water, or you don't make any money. I guess not you don't make any money from a cup. You don't make any money from a book. These are personal property. Jesus. And these people call themselves, like this guy goes around calling himself a doctor, you know, and that gives you some kind of authority to speak on things in our society. Dude, you don't know more than a toddler.
Right. And so in America today, the bourgeoisie, so defined in these crazy categories, might be a lot bigger than the proletariat. There's not that many people even that are working in the steel. I drove across the bridge the Allegheny coming here today, right? Those old steel mills, they're shut down now. Yeah. You know, a lot of them are working at home on their computers and their laptops in homes that they own.
Here's the
thanks to capitalism.
Here's the final line from the.
Yes, and they're still selling their labor. They're still selling their labor. And that's what you call the decay of imperialism. You know, that phenomena you've noticed where the banks and the capitalists have outsourced a lot of our good manufacturing jobs. And, you know, in a lot of those places have replaced the manufacturing jobs with opioids, which has led to horrible crises of addiction in a lot of communities that used to be based around manufacturing. That is called the decay of imperialism because capitalists realize they can outsource their outsource production to sweatshops, pay less for their labor, and make more money. So that leaves people here in the US to do Uber Eats or work at Starbucks or work from home, which apparently this guy is against and doesn't realize that people who work from home are still selling their time and energy and their activity, their life activity, which is their labor. And I mean, if you strictly define the proletariat as industrial workers, you can do that, sure, but it's still the working masses, though. Right? You could say maybe the proletariat strictly in that strictly defined sense has shrunk, but the vast majority of Americans are still part of the working mass. The vast majority of Americans still don't own capital. There's still a tiny, tiny percentage of Americans who belong to Vanguard and BlackRock investment groups who own like 50% of the country's wealth. Right? And that's what we're against. That's what Marx was against. But they take these, you know, they look at the decay of capitalist imperialism, which is something Marxists predicted in 1917. They look at it happening modern day in a capitalist imperialist nation. They're like, well, Marxism's been proven incorrect. No, you dumb. Marx predicted this. And if you actually read the stuff you talked about, you would know that. It's just so frustrating because, like, I spend so much time I'm done with that video. So thank you for sending it. But I spend so much time trying to understand this stuff and wrap my head around this stuff. Not just the simple stuff either, right? Like the complex stuff about socialist economic planning and you know, Try and understand these calculations that Marx is using to describe circulation and describe capitalist production and how value is circulated within a capitalist system. And I expect to be able to use that information in a debate, or I expect to be able to bring that information up when I'm discussing this stuff. But then the academics in our society are saying stuff like, well, there's no such thing as the proletariat anymore. Everybody's bourgeoisie because they all own houses or because they all own a toothbrush. Like, people in Marx's day had houses too. The proletariat in Marx's day had personal property too that they buy with their wages, and Marx discusses this in depth. But you're too big of an intellectual fraud to actually read it. You just dismiss Marxism as bad and evil because you can right now in our culture, although that is changing. And it allows you to be an intellectual fraud. It allows you to talk about things that you haven't studied or haven't understood, right? It's just pure freaking laziness. And I say that, from the perspective of somebody who does take the time to understand this stuff, from somebody who has been in academia for a while, who, actually tries to get a grasp on the things that I'm talking about. So I'm not lying to you all when I'm on here on these streams. But then there are these podcasters, these guys flaunting the fact that they have a PhD, that they're a doctor, running their mouth about things they don't understand. And it's just pure freaking laziness, and I can't stand it. Sit down, shut up, and read a book, and then talk about what you learned. Don't read the 30-page Communist Manifesto and act like you're the expert. No more proletarians. They all bought stonks. Yeah, I mean, that's a better argument than saying people own a house or people own personal property. Someone owns a toothbrush, so therefore they're part of the bourgeoisie, right? You could make the argument that because people can invest in stocks, that that makes them part of the bourgeoisie. It does make it less in their interest to overthrow the system. But, people investing in a 401k, people having a few stocks that hopefully create a retirement fund for them, which is becoming more and more and more difficult to do because wealth and stocks and control. Stocks basically represent control of the means of production. That's being concentrated more and more at the top into the hands of Vanguard and BlackRock and these other investment groups. But still, even if you do own some stocks that are part of your 401k or part of your retirement plan, you still don't have an infinitesimal fraction of what those investment groups have. You have a 1/1,000,000th of what Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and the actual bourgeoisie owns in stock, right? You have an insignificant amount to where if you're a working person, it's still, more than worth it for you, or you should still want to overthrow the ruling class. Right? You don't get to control politics. You don't control the media. You don't control the legal system because you're invested in a few stocks, right? You don't become the economic ruling class because you own a tiny infinitesimal fraction of the means of production through stocks. Yeah. But I mean, even that's a better argument than what Dr. What's his name was making. Management of resources isn't automatically capitalism. It's just how life works. Yes. And socialism understands that. Marxism does. Eddie, here's a Vouch video explaining a brain-dead take on the Cuban Missile Crisis. Oh my gosh. I actually have that video because you sent it to me earlier. It's on our stream plan to react to at some point. I'll react to it at some point. According to these hacks, buy one Starbucks coffee and you are a bourgeoisie. Yeah, and then they act like, so, you get exploited 40 to 60 hours a week and you can barely pay your rent and you can barely survive. But then if you, if you buy anything that capitalism is throwing at you, that the capitalists are throwing at you so they can continue to make obscene profits, that they're advertising and marketing to you all the time. If you buy one of those coffees, then, oh, you can't criticize capitalism and you have to support capitalism. Don't you like your coffee? No, but I know where my coffee came from. I know my coffee came from the labor of workers, and I was way upcharged on this coffee so that Howard Schultz and the other Starbucks owners and stock investors can make millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars off the labor of the workers who actually made this coffee. Right? Under socialism, this coffee would still exist, but it would the workers who made it wouldn't be exploited. They would actually get the fruits of what they create. And, you know, everybody would have access to things like coffee. I don't know. Everyone pretty much has access to coffee under capitalism. So that part didn't make sense. But you see what I'm saying. Labor needs to be managed under any society. Labor and resources need to be managed under any society, right? But if something that's produced by labor under capitalism, if you enjoy that or buy that, these hacks will be like, oh, you're participating in consumerism. You have to support capitalism, you ungrateful bastard. Like, no, I support labor and the products of labor, and I enjoy the products of labor, and I think that labor should be managed differently. So the people who, you know, got these coffee beans that were made into my coffee aren't being paid $1 an hour somewhere in Latin America on some essentially plantation dominated by Western corporations. Bad avocado toast. Oh, yeah. Everybody who buys avocado toast is now part of the bourgeoisie. Sorry, communists. Hate to break it to you. Marxism has been debunked. I do want to cover... Oh, sorry. Someone was asking for the tweet earlier about the Wikipedia guy. I just found it. I don't know if Cobra Commander sent that because it was his tweet, but... I kind of want to cover this AOC video, but I don't know if I have time right now. It's kind of a long one. Actually, I do want to cover this. Screw it. Let's do it. So shout out to Jimmy Dore for covering this first. He's kind of where I got all this stuff from. And we're going to play a little bit of one of his videos later. But he showed this article from 2021, I believe, called The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. Saved the 2020 election, meaning there was a shadow campaign that didn't let Trump win. It stifled the will of the people for democracy. It's not that Trump was the will of the people. But this is an incredible article. An incredible article. Lots of bombshells or lots of crazy things just dropped in here and said, or dropped in here as if they're normal things to say. So you'll see what I mean. Starts out like this. Something happened at the November 3rd election. Nothing. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take the streets, planning hundreds of protests. Right-wing militias were getting ready. 75% of Americans voiced a concern about violence, but there was an eerie quiet as Trump refused to concede. Jubilation broke out for Biden. And I mean, eventually you had the Capitol riots. So, you know, there was eventually right-wing violence. But either way, this is where things really start to get weird. Really start to get weird. There was a conspiracy. Let me zoom in a little bit so y'all can read this. Sorry. There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes. One that both curtailed the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were that the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists. I gotta zoom out one so I can make sure I read this. Left-wing activists and business titans. An informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-noticed joint statement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and AFL-CIO published on Election Day. Both sides would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive, racial justice protests in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. The forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to prevent Trump from taking power and protect our sacred democracy. And what they mean by left-wing activists and by the forces of labor coming together with capital, they mean social democrats like AOC, right? They mean American progressives pretending to be socialists but actually serving the ruling class. They mean union bureaucrats, like the bureaucrats at the head of the AFL-CIO and the other unions who aren't actually part of the rank and file workers. They're openly talking about an alliance between big business, between corporate investors, between Wall Street, and the people who pretend to be leftists, the people who pretend to advocate for the working class. So they say that they make sure that the election remains free and uncorrupted. And apparently this author is so blinded by Trump derangement syndrome and liberal ideology that they can't see how CEOs and business titans doing a shadow campaign to control the election and decides who wins is corruption. That's literally the argument they're making, is that there was a shadow campaign, that's to use their words, not mine. There was a shadow campaign waged by the ruling elite in this country, the dominant economic class, the capitalist class, to decide who won the election, and that is what protected democracy, or that is what kept the election, quote unquote, free and uncorrupted. So business titans using their wealth to control the election isn't considered corruption? Then what the hell is corruption? Apparently, I don't even know what corruption is. So the article says that they successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder stance on disinformation, which they call a bipartisan triumph of American democracy. So like Midwestern Marx being banned on TikTok 7 times, is that misinformation, even though everything we were saying on TikTok was true? And it's crazy that they're saying this now, or that they're saying businesses and left-wing activists collaborated for this shadow campaign to protect democracy by pressuring people off social media, by pressuring social media companies. Because recently we've had the story, of course, the story about Hunter Biden's laptop. I'll start with that one, where Mark Zuckerberg admitted to Joe Rogan that they censored this story around election time because the FBI pressured them to. Right? So blatant censorship, blatantly withholding information from the American public in order to influence the election, which is apparently to protect corruption and protect democracy. It's not considered corruption and, subverting democracy anymore, because if the liberals do it, it's always okay and right. If they do it to stop Trump, then it's all right, because Trump, is the only thing that can be anti-democratic, apparently. But then we also have stories like this, where there was a left-wing think tank, which was a liberal think tank made up of the likes of Bill Kristol, Michael McFaul, Obama-era higher-ups, Clinton ally John Podesta. So the typical figures, typical Democratic Party elites who aren't really left-wing, but either way, they just got caught pressuring Twitter to delete thousands of accounts, claiming that they were Russian bots. And none of them were actually Russian bots. They were pressuring Twitter just to ban and cancel any account that was giving a narrative that the Democratic Party didn't like, the Democratic elites didn't like, and censoring them, falsely claiming they were Russian bots. So we just found out about all of this mass social media censorship designed to control the election. Basically, what the Democrats accused Russia of doing in 2016 to defeat Hillary, right? Remember, they accused Russia of controlling social media with a bunch of Russian bots. Basically, they controlled social media using their money, wealth, and influence. And they're admitting it, that there was this secret shadow campaign. And then they're talking about how this saved democracy. But this is the most corrupt example of ruling class elites controlling democracy and influencing political democracy that I've ever seen. How is this protecting democracy just because it led to Trump losing? And that's why I say the author is blinded by Trump derangement syndrome, but it's crazy. And it's a perfect example of how democracy in a liberal capitalist system is just a shell. It's just a shell or a sham that protects the capitalist dictatorship. They talk about democracy, but when they say democracy, it means the opposite. It literally means the exact opposite. We're protecting democracy by controlling what you're allowed to see and say. And we're protecting democracy by withholding real information, like the Hunter Biden laptop story, while feeding you BS information and banning anybody, falsely accusing them of being Russian bots who would want to tell you the truth. Like our TikTok got banned today. Our 7th account got banned. And then these liberals are now giving themselves a pat on the back. Oh, we protected democracy by banning 7 of Midwestern Marxist accounts for telling people the truth. No, you guys are the reason we don't have a democracy. You guys are the dictators. You guys are the corruptors, right? You're not fighting corruption. You are the corruption. But that's just liberal arrogance for you to spend a bunch of money to control and push an election to go a certain way. Like, we did it. We saved democracy by controlling that election and not letting the people decide who they wanted. Oh my gosh, it's insane. And now the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability is investigating this shadow campaign because they're like, this is actually corruption. This is illegal, is what a lot of people are saying. And progressives, left-wing activists who sided with big business because they had to defeat Trump, apparently, are doubling down on what they did and praising themselves for protecting democracy. So let's watch this video here.
And so this is what AOC has. So they're admitting it. Twitter is admitting they made a mistake. They did the wrong thing. They censored someone in a bogus way. So watch this.
By other news outlets that hope to corroborate reporting, as many did. The newspaper wasn't sharing what it obtained. New York Post had this alleged information and was trying to publish it without any corroboration, without any backup information.
Why don't they just say many experts like AOC and then corroborate how she does? Many experts say that's stochastic. What experts?
You mean they were trying to file an accurate story.
Trying to protect sources?
We now know it's an accurate story. And so you want someone to...
You guys catch that? She's supporting like the FBI, the intelligence agencies, the armed bodies of the capitalist state, censoring media outlets like the New York Post, saying these stories weren't corroborated, which they were. You know, these were accurate stories like the ones about Hunter Biden's laptop. I'm sorry, right? I know it's inconvenient when you're trying to push this idea that Joe Biden's the savior of America, that his son is, you know, involved in a bunch of corrupt business dealings in Ukraine, and is also, you know, basically has been allowed to be a very irresponsible drug addict while still being a multimillionaire and never being punished for his crimes, while meanwhile the prisons are filled with poor people who got busted for nonviolent drug offenses. I know that's an inconvenient truth for the Democrats, but it's true. But because it's inconvenient, AOC says, no, it's not true. And it's okay for the capitalist dictatorship, for the state to censor media outlets who want to report on it. Like, this is leftism, or this is progressivism today. This is where progressivism leads us. And this is why we need Marxism.
So what she's doing is saying Twitter is a publisher, which they're not supposed to be, because you can sue a publisher. You can't sue Twitter. You can't sue a bookstore if there's something bad in a book. You have to sue the publisher. So that's where Twitter gets that.
Yeah, it's just a platform where anyone can say anything. So you could sue someone for a tweet where they defame you in a tweet, but you can't sue the platform because it's supposed to be an open platform for debate and discussion, says the guy who just had his 7th TikTok account banned for telling the truth and trying to engage in debate and discussion.
That exemption, just like Facebook, they get that exemption from being considered publishers. They can go censor and decide what to publish, and they're not considered publishers. Why? Because the government knows they can make them do what they want. That's why. Here we go. But she's now pretending that the story was bogus with her big glasses. Watch this.
They were trying to publish it to Twitter. Twitter did not let them, and now they were upset. I believe that political operatives who sought to inject explosive disinformation with the Washington Post couldn't get away with it.
She's using all the buzzwords too. Disinformation. They wanted to spread disinformation and Twitter wouldn't let them. And now they're mad. Now they're mad that they couldn't spread their disinformation. Where were you about where's the outrage about the last story I showed AOC? Where's the outrage about the Democratic think tank, the think tank connected to your party, who is pressuring Twitter to ban all these different accounts like ours for being Russian bots when they weren't Russian bots? Right? Where's your outrage about that? But she's not outraged about that. And in fact, she's saying it's good that Twitter was banning all these people. It's good that Twitter was preventing all these people from sharing the story because this Hunter Biden laptop story wasn't true. or whatever story she's talking. I think that's the story she's discussing here, which is, like I said, a true story. I know it. You can just call anything disinformation nowadays. That's the new liberal buzzword. But she's mad at, or I mean, she's this person who claims to be a socialist is saying that the capitalist dictatorship should work together with the capitalist social media companies, the Silicon Valley oligarchs, to censor certain stories. Right. And she's doubling down on it and being like, oh, these Republicans are just so mad they couldn't spread their disinformation. First of all, it wasn't all Republicans. It's not all conservatives who have been censored. Like I said, we've been censored countless times. And we have evidence that the ruling class has been working with Twitter, and the FBI, who has a terrible history of suppressing the masses, have been working with these social media companies to suppress things that are true, that are proven as fact. But then you're going to come here in front of the American public and say that Twitter and the FBI and all these organizations are only censoring disinformation? She's running interference for the FBI and the U.S. intelligence agencies.
And now they're livid. And they want the ability to do it again. They want the ability to inject this again.
She's pretending like the Hunter Biden laptop is disinformation. She's just repeating a lie. She's just lying. Like she didn't get the memo. We've known this for a while. Hunter Biden admits it was his laptop. They all admit. The guy at Twitter just admitted.
Which half was fake of the story? I believe she said it was half fake.
She's going to say it in a second.
So they've dragged a social media platform here in Congress. They're weaponizing the use of this committee so that they can do it again. A whole hearing about a 24-hour hiccup in a right-wing political operation. That is why we are here right now. And it's just an abuse of public resources, an abuse of public time. We could be talking about healthcare.
And she tries to scapegoat the Republicans, right? She tries to scapegoat the Republican. This is just to call it a right-wing thing. This is just the right-wingers who are mad because the pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist Democratic Party was censoring anybody who's critical of them, was working together with the social media oligarchs to ban anybody who's critical of the Democratic Party and call them a Russian bot, even though they're not. This is just a right-wing thing. No, this is holding your party accountable. This is, trying to hold the bourgeoisie accountable. And I know this committee hearing will lead to nothing. And I know the Republicans don't actually care that much about free speech, and they only care about the Hunter Biden laptop story because it makes Joe Biden look bad. Right? But that doesn't mean it's all just part of some right-wing plot. We know that liberal think tanks were pressuring Twitter, and the FBI was pressuring Facebook to censor certain stories and control the election. That is subverting democracy. That is a shadow campaign to subvert democracy that the Times article that we just looked at was talking about openly. Right? You can't just say this is some right-wing thing. I'm allowed to censor anybody, and whoever criticizes me is just a right-winger.
We could be talking about bringing down the cost of
Sorry, and she says we could be talking about healthcare. Why didn't you force the vote then? Why didn't you tell Nancy Pelosi you weren't going to vote for her for Speaker of the House unless they brought up Medicare for all, unless they brought up the conversation about healthcare? Well, you didn't do that, and you said you didn't do it because you didn't want to cause reputational harm and relational harm, because it's more important to cozy up to Nancy Pelosi than it is to get people healthcare. But then when, the Republican Party happens to notice some corruption in the Democratic Party and call it out, you're like, oh, we should be talking about healthcare instead. Okay, Alexandria.
Prescription drugs. We could be talking about abortion rights, civil rights, voting rights, but instead we're talking about Hunter Biden's half-fake laptop story. I mean, this is an embarrassment.
What's actually embarrassing is how much of a mask just came off of you right there.
No shit, Jimmy. No kidding. And this is why people love Jimmy Dore, because the Majority Report, and maybe Kyle Kalinske will cover this, but probably not. But a lot of these progressive outlets, aren't going to cover this. They're not going to criticize AOC for this, even though she's quite literally running interference for the U.S. intelligence agencies and for censorship designed to control elections. I mean, a mask slip is right. That was the mask slipping off right there. It's like that Times article that said there's an alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. right? AOC's mask just slipped, and we saw the connection between left-wing activists and business titans. She's called out about the FBI and different corporations and Democratic think tanks pressuring social media companies to control the election. And she decides to run interference for them and say that anybody who's mad about this corruption and anyone who's mad about this censorship is just a right-winger, is just, part of some right-wing plot to attack me. And no, I'm a Marxist. I'm as far left-wing as you can get, AOC, and I've been banned 7 times and I'm sick of it. And then here you are, this person who's supposed to be a socialist, who's supposed to be on our side, who's supposed to be for the workers, running interference for the intelligence agencies, and saying that it's just a plot by, trying to hold the Democratic Party accountable and these social media companies accountable for their censorship is nothing but a right-wing plot to protect disinformation. I forgot about that buzzword. Right? Maybe I should have been banned. I was talking about the war in Ukraine that AOC keeps voting to prolong and exacerbate. So, I've been spreading disinformation. I shouldn't be allowed to do that. Because if the Democrats do something, it is okay and it is actually good. And if the Democrats do something bad, it's actually the opposite. If the Democrats infringe on your freedom of speech so that they can control the election and subvert democracy, they're actually protecting democracy, because otherwise Trump would have won. How does that make any sense? I don't know, but liberals still believe this shit, and progressives somehow. And yeah, like the Hunter Biden laptop story, like I said, I know it's inconvenient for the Democrats, and I'm not, there's a lot of Republicans and Trump people who, just want to dunk on Biden. Yeah, there's a lot of MAGA people who just want to make fun of Hunter Biden for being a drug addict, right? But there's a lot of legitimate stuff in that laptop, like his business dealings in Ukraine, that should have been public information before we voted on the new president, before we voted on the leader of our country. If we actually had a democracy, something like that would be very important. It would definitely matter, which is why the Democrats spent so much energy covering it up and censoring that story. Right? And AOC just says, oh, because it's Biden, who the story was directed at, and because it's MAGA people and because it's Trump who benefited or who would have benefited from having the story released, therefore censorship's okay. And subverting democracy is actually protecting democracy. It is freaking insane. And the last thing about the Hunter Biden laptop, yeah, there have been, there are a lot of right-wingers who just want to attack him for being addicted to drugs, which is a health issue and something that's terrible and sad and destroys lives. So I'm not in favor of just, mocking people for being drug addicts and saying, why don't you fix it yourself? 'Cause a lot of people are born into horrible situations, whatever. There's lots of reasons people get hooked on drugs and it destroys lives. But Hunter Biden has been a drug addict for the last 25 years. And when you read the contents of that laptop, he's been in and out of rehab, but every time he gets caught doing drugs, nothing happens, right? He continually fails upward, right? His punishment for getting caught doing drugs is he gets to sit on the board of some Ukrainian energy firm and collect millions of dollars for doing nothing, right? That's what he does. He collects millions of dollars because he owns capital in various places, which the laptop exposed, even though he's been doing nothing and has been addicted to drugs and acting extremely recklessly for years. Now, I wouldn't mind that he's addicted to drugs. I wouldn't even bring that up, except for the U.S. has 24% of the world's prison population in our country right now, and many of those people are locked up for drugs because partially Joe Biden's crime bill. Because Joe Biden, while he was in Congress, pushed for harder sentences on nonviolent drug offenders. He pushed to lock people in the slammer. He went and gave a speech in front of Congress saying that, if we don't lock up more of these drug dealers, if we don't strengthen the police and strengthen the prisons and get tougher on nonviolent drug offenders, they're going to come for your family. These violent criminals are going to come for you. And that's why we Democrats need to be tough on crime and get them off the streets. Meanwhile, his son is running around doing crack while collecting millions of dollars from a Ukrainian energy firm or from whatever places that he gets to own capital in or be on the board of because his dad's Joe Biden. So yeah, that matters. That really matters. That makes the Biden family look horrible, which is why they didn't want this story leaked before the election. But it's true. It's facts. Joe Biden is the reason that your cousin or your friend or your whatever is in jail doing prison labor right now for a nonviolent drug offense, but his son is allowed to collect millions of dollars and never get in trouble for doing crack. That's why that story matters, and that's why it's not just a right-wing thing to be mad about the intelligence agencies and the corporations and the social media oligarchs censoring the laptop story. And as we pointed out today, there's far more examples of ruling class censorship of various stories, including those related to the 2020 election, right? And we should be against that across the board, not just when it's convenient for our political team. AOC. Fact. Thank you. All right, y'all. I got to head out. I'm glad I got to do that segment because I got all fired up. That was a good segment. I had been planning to do that for a bit. Shout out to Jimmy Dore for the clips. And Jimmy Dore also is the one who shared that Time article. So I basically, Jimmy Dore or Jimmy Dore's producers, I basically copied their structure for that segment. So please don't sue me, Jimmy Dore. We're on the same team. So I didn't chat, but enjoyed the stream. Wow, thank you very much. I'm surprised you were here the whole time without getting in the chat. But thank you very much, everyone. You are epic. Thank you. You're all epic. Thank you to our mods. Thank you to Ware Pilgrim, Cobra Commander, Jacob. Who else? I don't know. There's other mods in here too. Hope y'all have a great day. Yeah, I guess I got nothing else to say. I'll cut this into clips as soon as possible. I got to go wrestle my brother right now, though, so he can win a national title. All right. Solidarity, everyone.